The attack came like lightning, splitting the sky without warning. One moment, Sergeant Kim Min-ho was scanning the orange horizon through his rifle scope, and the next moment the air around them exploded into chaos. The crystalline canyon that had seemed so peaceful suddenly filled with the screaming sound of energy weapons and the sharp crack of superheated air. Being torn apart by beams of light, the Void Reapers materialized from empty space, as if they had been ghosts becoming solid there. Adaptive camouflage flickered and failed as they opened fire, revealing creatures that looked like nightmares given form. They stood nearly 3 meters tall with bodies that seemed to be part machine and part living tissue their limbs moved with. Fluid grace that spoke of perfect engineering, while their faces were hidden behind masks that glowed with malevolent intelligence. Skim shouted orders to his scattered soldiers as he dove behind the purple rocks that had been their observation post. The enemy weapons sent beams of energy that turned stone into glass and metal into vapor. Where the beams struck the crystalline formations, they left pools of molten material that glowed white-hot. The very air seemed to burn as the energy passed through it. Private Choi Dae-won rolled behind a cluster of coral trees. Just as one of the alien beams passed through the space where his head had been a moment before, the beam continued its path and struck a formation of crystal spires 50 meters away. The entire structure collapsed into itself, creating a crater that still glowed with residual energy. Choi could feel the heat on his face even from this distance. The Void Reapers moved with coordinated precision that spoke of extensive training and advanced battlefield awareness. They did not charge forward like wild animals, but advanced using proper cover and supporting fire. Their movements flowed together like a deadly dance, with each warrior covering the others as they closed the distance to the human positions. Corporal Lee So-young had found cover behind a formation of metallic rocks that jutted from the ground. Like frozen waterfalls, she pressed herself against the cool surface and tried to control her breathing while energy beams passed overhead. The enemy weapons made no sound except for the crackling of air being superheated, but she could hear the heavy footsteps of the Void Reapers as they advanced. 3 of the alien creatures were moving directly toward her position, their weapons charging with a high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate in her bones. They moved with confidence born of technological superiority and combat experience. Against dozens of galactic species, their adaptive armor shifted color and texture to match the surrounding terrain, making them difficult to track even when they were in the open. Lee raised her sniper rifle and settled the scope on the lead Void Reaper. The creature was still over 800 meters away, but well within range of her weapon. The rifle in her hands did not hum with energy or glow with power. It was silent, patient, and deadly. She controlled her breathing and felt for the rhythm of her heartbeat the way she had been trained since her first day in sniper school. The crosshairs settled on the center of the creature's torso, just below what appeared to be a command module attached to its chest. The alien was standing behind what it clearly considered adequate cover, a formation of crystalline spires that would have stopped any energy weapon in the galactic arsenal, but kinetic rounds followed different rules and obeyed older laws of physics. Lee squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar force, and the bullet left the barrel at a velocity that would have been impossible to achieve with energy weapons. The projectile crossed the 800-meter distance in less than a second, traveling faster than the speed of sound in the thin alien atmosphere. The lead Void Reaper was still scanning for threats when the bullet struck its torso. The kinetic round punched through its adaptive armor like the material was made of paper. The creature looked down at the hole in its chest with what might have been surprise before collapsing to the rocky ground. The other 2 aliens turned in confusion, searching for the weapon that had killed their companion. Their sensors were designed to detect energy signatures, heat sources, and electromagnetic emissions. The simple chemical reaction that had propelled Lee's bullet created none of these things. The rifle produced no muzzle flash, no energy beam, and no heat signature that their advanced detection systems could track. They knew their companion was dead, but they could not locate the threat that had killed it. Kim Min-ho had been watching the alien advance from his position behind the purple rocks when he saw the lead creature fall. He immediately understood what Lee had accomplished. The enemy was equipped to fight energy weapons, but their defenses were useless against simple kinetic projectiles. He raised his assault rifle and selected his targets with the calm precision of a professional soldier. The weapon in his hands was a masterpiece of human military engineering. Every component had been designed for reliability and effectiveness in combat conditions. The rifle could fire in single shots or fully automatic mode, and its ammunition was designed to transfer maximum kinetic energy to whatever it struck. The bullets were simple pieces of metal, but they were traveling at speeds that made them devastating weapons. Kim fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The rifle barked with sharp reports that echoed off the canyon walls but produced no energy signature for the alien sensors to detect. The bullets struck 2 more Void Reapers before they could even turn to face the new threat. The kinetic impacts sent the creatures tumbling backward, their advanced armor no more effective than cloth against the high-velocity projectiles. Private Nam Unesco was positioned on the far side of the canyon when she saw the enemy forces beginning to retreat. The surviving Void Reapers were clearly confused and disoriented by an attack method they had not encountered before. Their tactical doctrine was based on engaging enemies with similar technology, but the humans were fighting by completely different rules. One of the creatures was attempting to reach cover behind a cluster of metallic formations when Nam lined up her shot. The alien was moving fast, but she had trained to hit targets at much greater ranges and under worse conditions. Her rifle was zeroed for the local gravity and atmospheric conditions, and the target was well within her effective range. The bullet caught the retreating Void Reaper in the center of its back. The kinetic impact drove the creature forward into the rocky ground where it lay motionless. Nam worked the bolt of her rifle and chambered another round, but there were no more targets. The surviving aliens had disappeared behind the formations at the far end of the canyon. Private Choi Day One had been waiting for an enemy to come within range of his shotgun. When the last Void Reaper attempted to retreat past his position, he rose from cover and fired. The weapon discharged with a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the entire canyon. The spread of pellets struck the alien creature at close range, sending it tumbling into the rocky debris at the bottom of the formation. The battlefield fell silent except for the occasional crack of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through the crystal formations. The human soldiers remained in their positions for several minutes, waiting to see if more enemies would appear. When it became clear that the attack was over, they began to emerge from cover and assess the situation. Kim moved carefully from position to position, checking on his soldiers and examining the fallen enemies. The Void Reapers were definitely dead, but their equipment was still functioning. The advanced weapons and armor that had seemed so threatening were now just pieces of exotic technology scattered across the alien landscape. The communication channels were alive with chatter as news of the engagement spread through the Galactic defense network. The alien commanders monitoring the situation could not believe the reports. Primitive human soldiers with kinetic weapons had defeated technologically superior enemies without taking a single casualty. What the aliens did not understand was that human military doctrine was based on adaptability and the effective use of available resources. Human soldiers were trained to analyze enemy capabilities and develop countermeasures using whatever weapons and tactics were most effective. The fact that their weapons were simpler than alien technology did not make them less deadly in the right hands. As Kim reported the engagement to his superiors, he could hear the skepticism in their voices. The alien officers assumed that the human success was due to luck or some weakness in the particular Void Reaper unit they had encountered. The real test would come when human forces faced a larger enemy formation under more challenging conditions. That test was coming sooner than anyone expected. Word of the human squad's victory spread through the Galactic defense network like ripples across still water, but the reaction was not what Sergeant Kim Min-ho had expected. Instead of celebration or recognition, the alien commanders treated the engagement as an interesting anomaly rather than proof of human military effectiveness. General Vex of the Altarian Empire dismissed the report with a wave of his crystal hand, claiming that any species could defeat a small scouting party with adequate preparation. The alien officers assumed that the Void Reapers the humans had encountered were either damaged, defective, or operating under some kind of technical malfunction that had made them vulnerable to primitive weapons. The idea that kinetic projectiles could be genuinely effective against advanced alien Technology was too threatening to their worldview to be accepted without overwhelming evidence. Admiral Korth of the Zephyrian fleet was more diplomatic in his response, but equally skeptical. He congratulated the human forces on their successful engagement while making it clear that real combat against a full Void Reaper assault force would be an entirely different matter. The tentacled alien suggested that human forces should continue their reconnaissance duties while leaving major combat operations to species with appropriate technology. Kim found the alien attitudes frustrating, but not surprising. The galactic species had spent centuries developing their military doctrine around energy weapons and advanced technology. The idea that simpler weapons might actually be more effective in certain situations challenged everything they believed about warfare and technological progress. Meanwhile, the main battle on the other side of Kepler 442b was not going as well as the alien commanders had initially expected. The Void Reapers were proving to be more adaptable and more technologically sophisticated than intelligence reports had suggested. Their weapons were matching the firepower of galactic defense forces, while their tactics were superior to anything the aliens had encountered. The enemy was using stealth technology that allowed entire fleets to approach undetected before launching coordinated attacks. Their adaptive armor was learning to counter specific types of energy weapons, making each subsequent attack less effective than the previous one. Most troubling of all, the Void Reapers seemed to understand galactic military doctrine better than many of the species fighting them. Long-range sensors detected a massive enemy fleet approaching the planet's northern hemisphere where the main alien forces were concentrated. The Void Reaper ships were larger and more numerous than previous engagements had suggested, and they were moving with tactical precision that spoke of extensive planning and preparation. The galactic forces repositioned their weapons platforms and prepared for the largest battle of the war. Plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids charged their firing chambers, while molecular disintegrators calibrated their targeting systems. Quantum missile launchers armed warheads that could tear holes in space itself, and energy shields powered up to maximum strength. The human contingent had been quietly reinforced during the past week by additional Earth forces, including specialized units that had been hastily transported across the galaxy. Master Sergeant Bay Hyojin arrived with a team of sniper specialists, whose equipment looked ancient compared to alien weapons, but whose skills had been proven in conflicts across Earth. The new human soldiers carried rifles that appeared to be museum pieces by galactic standards, but they moved with confidence and precision that caught the attention of some alien observers. Their weapons were simple mechanical devices that relied on chemical propellants and metal projectiles, but the soldiers handling them displayed a level of expertise that transcended mere technological sophistication. When the Void Reaper main assault began, it was like watching two different philosophies of warfare clash against each other. The alien forces relied on overwhelming technological superiority and coordinated energy weapon bombardments. The enemy responded with superior mobility, adaptive defenses, and tactics that seemed designed specifically to counter galactic military doctrine. The initial exchange of fire created a light show that was visible from orbit, as plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the battlefield in patterns of destruction. The alien weapons were incredibly powerful, capable of destroying entire mountains with single shots, but the Void Reapers were not fighting the kind of static battle that galactic forces were prepared for. Instead of engaging in direct energy weapon duels, the enemy used hit-and-run tactics that exploited the charging times and predictable firing patterns of galactic weapons. They would appear from stealth, strike at vulnerable targets, and disappear before the aliens could respond effectively. Their mobility allowed them to choose when and where to fight while keeping their opponents off balance. The Void Reaper shields were adapting to the alien energy weapons, with each exchange absorbing more damage and deflecting more attacks. The enemy armor was learning to disperse energy more effectively, making the galactic weapons less lethal with each passing hour. What had started as a confident assault by technologically superior forces was turning into a grinding battle of attrition. That was when the human forces proved their worth in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. The Void Reaper adaptive systems that could learn to counter Energy weapons were useless against kinetic projectiles traveling at hypersonic velocities. Their shields could absorb plasma bolts but could not stop simple bullets. Their armor could disperse energy but crumpled under kinetic impact. Master Sergeant Bay and his sniper team took positions on high ground overlooking the main battle area. Their rifles had ranges measured in kilometers rather than light years, but within those ranges they were absolutely deadly. The enemy forces that had seemed invulnerable to galactic weapons began falling to shots fired from distances so great that their sensors could not even detect the shooters. The psychological effect on both sides was immediate and dramatic. The Void Reapers, who had been advancing with confidence, suddenly found themselves under attack from weapons they could not track, defend against, or counter. Their tactical coordination began to break down as commanders fell to sniper fire from impossible distances. The galactic forces initially could not understand what was happening. Enemy units that had been shrugging off their most powerful weapons were suddenly collapsing without any visible cause. It took several minutes before alien observers realized that the human soldiers were systematically eliminating Void Reaper forces with weapons that their sensors could barely detect. Kim and his original squad had been positioned to support the main battle when it began. They found themselves in perfect position to demonstrate the effectiveness of human infantry tactics against an enemy that had been designed to fight energy weapons. The assault rifles and shotguns that had been mocked by alien commanders proved devastatingly effective at close range. The Void Reapers had never encountered kinetic weapons in their previous battles against galactic forces. They had no defensive protocols for dealing with projectiles that left no energy signature created, no heat source, and could not be deflected by standard shielding systems. Their tactical doctrine was based on countering energy weapons, and they were completely unprepared for the different challenges posed by human firearms. As the battle progressed, it became clear that human weapons were not just effective against individual enemies, but were actually superior to alien technology in many combat situations. The kinetic rounds could penetrate materials that stopped energy beams. The weapons could fire continuously without charging delays, and the ammunition was simple enough to manufacture and transport in large quantities. The alien commanders, watching the battle from their command posts, began to realize that they had made a fundamental error in dismissing human military capabilities. The primitive weapons they had mocked were proving more effective than their own advanced technology against an enemy that represented the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Tide of battle was turning, but the real test was yet to come. The Void Reaper command ship was descending through the atmosphere, protected by defensive systems that had already proven immune to the most powerful weapons in the galactic arsenal. If human forces could find a way to defeat that ultimate threat, they would earn the respect and recognition that had been denied to them since first contact. 3 weeks after the humiliating presentation to the Galactic Defense Council, Sergeant Kim Min-ho found himself crouched behind a cluster of purple rocks on a planet whose name he could not pronounce. The alien world of Kepler 442b stretched out before him in colors that did not exist on Earth. The sky was a deep orange that hurt to look at directly, and 2 small suns cast double shadows across everything. The trees, if they could be called trees, looked more like giant coral formations that swayed without any. When Kim adjusted his grip on his standard-issue rifle and felt the familiar weight of human engineering in his hands. The weapon had been manufactured on Earth using techniques perfected over centuries of warfare. Every part had been tested and retested until it worked perfectly in any condition. The metal was treated to resist corrosion. The moving parts were precision machined to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, and the barrel was rifled in a pattern that had been calculated by mathematicians and proven by countless soldiers beside him. Corporal Lee So-young was checking her sniper rifle scope for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. She was nervous, and Kim did not blame her. This was their first mission since joining the Galactic War, and they had been assigned to what the alien commanders called reconnaissance duty. Kim knew what that really meant. They were being kept safely away from any real fighting while the important species handled the actual combat. The human contingent on Kepler 442b consisted of 24 soldiers from various Earth military units. They had been hastily assembled and shipped across the galaxy in an alien transport that moved faster than anything humans had ever built. The journey had taken 3 days and covered distances that would have taken Earthships decades to travel. Kim still felt sick when he thought about moving through something the aliens called hyperspace. Private Choi Day 1 was monitoring the communication channels from his position, behind a formation of crystalline structures that grew from the ground like frozen lightning. He had overheard an Altarian squad leader referring to the human soldiers as primitive backup, and the insult still burned in his mind. The aliens had made it clear that they expected the humans to stay out of the way and try not to get killed while the real warriors won the war. The main battle was taking place on the other side of the planet, where massed alien forces were engaging a Void Reaper invasion fleet. The reports coming through the communication system painted a picture of incredible destruction energy. Weapons that could vaporize mountains were being fired in volleys that lit up entire continents. Plasma bolts the size of city blocks streaked through the atmosphere, while quantum missiles tore holes in space itself. Kim listened to the battle reports with growing unease. The alien weapons were certainly powerful, but they seemed to follow predictable patterns. Every energy blast had to be charged before firing, creating a delay that skilled enemies could exploit. The plasma weapons left heat signatures that could be tracked across vast distances, and the quantum missiles required complex targeting systems that could be disrupted by electronic warfare. The Void Reapers were adapting to these patterns faster than the aliens had expected. Enemy forces were using hit-and-run tactics that took advantage of the charging delays. They would appear from stealth attack during the vulnerable charging periods and disappear before the aliens could return fire effectively. The tide of battle that had seemed to favor the Galactic Defense Forces was slowly shifting. Private Nam Unesio was crouched in a defensive position that gave her a clear view of the surrounding terrain. She had been assigned to watch for any enemy scouts that might try to flank the main battle. Her rifle was loaded with standard Earth ammunition, simple metal bullets that relied on kinetic energy rather than exotic physics to do their damage. The weapon felt almost primitive compared to the energy rifles carried by alien soldiers, but it was reliable and deadly in trained hands. The landscape around them was eerily quiet compared to the massive battle raging on the far side of the planet. Strange alien plants rustled in the breeze, and creatures that looked like floating jellyfish drifted between the coral trees, but there were no signs of Void Reaper activity in their sector. The enemy was apparently focused entirely on the main engagement, leaving the reconnaissance areas undefended. This suited the alien commanders perfectly. They could claim that humans were contributing to the war effort while keeping them safely away from any actual danger. If the primitive Earth soldiers were killed, it would be an embarrassment but not a significant military loss. The real fighting would be done by species with proper weapons and adequate training. Kim studied the tactical displays on his helmet mounted screen and noticed something troubling. The Void Reapers were not fighting like the mindless destroyers described in intelligence briefings. They were using sophisticated tactics that suggested high intelligence and advanced military training. Their movements were coordinated, their timing was precise, and they seemed to understand galactic military doctrine better than many of the species fighting them. The enemy was also demonstrating technology that exceeded even the most optimistic estimates of their capabilities. Their stealth systems could hide entire fleets until the moment of attack. Their adaptive armor could adjust to counter different types of energy weapons, and their mobility allowed them to strike targets across vast distances with minimal warning. Lee So-young lowered her rifle scope and turned to Kim with concern written across her face. The chatter on the communication channels was becoming more urgent and less confident. The alien forces were taking heavier casualties than expected, and several advanced weapons platforms had been destroyed by enemy action that seemed to come from nowhere. As Kim listened to the reports, he began to understand what was happening. The galactic military had become dependent on overwhelming technological superiority they had grown accustomed to, fighting enemies who were less advanced and could be defeated through raw firepower alone. The Void Reapers represented something new, an enemy that could match or exceed their technology while using tactics that the aliens were not prepared to counter. The Human soldiers continued their watch in the quiet sector, unaware that they were about to face an enemy that would test everything they had learned about warfare. Their simple weapons and basic tactics were about to be put against the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever known, and unlike the alien forces, the humans were not dependent on technology that could be countered or disrupted. Choi Day-1 received an urgent message through his communication system. Enemy scouts had been detected moving toward their position. The Void Reapers had apparently decided to investigate the quiet sector where the primitive humans had been stationed. What the aliens expected to be a safe assignment was about to become the most important battle of the entire war. Kim ordered his soldiers to take defensive positions and prepare for contact. He checked his rifle one more time and made sure his ammunition pouches were easily accessible. The weapon in his hands represented thousands of years of human warfare, refined and perfected through countless battles. It was simple, reliable, and deadly, and it was about to prove that sometimes the oldest solutions were also the best solutions. The alien commanders monitoring the situation expected the human forces to be quickly overwhelmed by technologically superior enemies. They were already discussing how to extract any survivors and reassign them to safer duties. What they did not understand was that human soldiers had been fighting against superior odds for their entire history and had learned to win through skill, determination, and the intelligent use of whatever weapons they could obtain. As the first signs of enemy movement appeared on the horizon, Kim smiled grimly and settled into his firing position. The galaxy was about to learn what human soldiers could accomplish when they were finally allowed to do what they did best. The Great Hall of the Galactic Defense Council was bigger than any building on Earth Commander Park Jinwoo had ever seen. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into shadows, and the walls curved in ways that made his human eyes hurt to look at them too. Long, strange lights floated in the air without any source, and the floor beneath his boots felt like it was made of liquid metal that had somehow turned solid. Around him sat creatures from across the galaxy, each one more alien and terrifying than the last. To his human eyes, the Altarians looked like giant crystal spiders with 4 arms and faces that sparkled with their own inner light. The Zephyrians were like massive squids that floated in tanks of purple liquid, their tentacles moving in patterns that Park suspected was their way of talking. The nebula collective representatives were just clouds of glowing gas that somehow had voices that spoke directly into his mind. Park stood at the center of it all, holding a simple tablet that contained everything Earth had to offer in this galactic war. His dress uniform felt small and plain compared to the flowing robes and mechanical armor worn by the other species delegates. He was just one human representing his entire planet, while some species had dozens of representatives filling entire sections of the curved seating. The holographic display above his head showed images of human soldiers carrying rifles. Park had requested the presentation be simple and direct. Earth did not have fancy technology like the other species, but they had weapons that worked and soldiers who knew how to use them. The first image showed a standard assault rifle, the kind carried by infantry across Earth. The metal was dark and worn, the design unchanged for decades because it did not need to be changed. General Vex of the Altarian Empire was the first to make a sound. It started as a low rumble deep in his crystal chest, then grew into something that sounded like breaking glass mixed with laughter. His 4 arms slapped against his armored torso as he rocked back and forth in his floating chair. The sound echoed through the great hall, and soon other species were joining in. The Zephyrians made a noise like water being sucked down a drain, but faster and higher pitched. Their tentacles writhed and twisted in their tanks, splashing the purple liquid everywhere. The floating gas clouds that were the Nebula Collective pulsed with bright colors that Park somehow knew meant they found something very funny. The laughter spread through the hall like a wave, each species adding their own strange sounds to the chaos. Admiral Korth of the Zephyrian fleet was laughing so hard that his tank was shaking. His massive tentacles pressed against the glass as he tried to speak. "You fire pieces of metal," he wheezed between laughs. Actual pieces of metal through the air like some primitive cave dweller. The other Zephyrians in his section made sounds that Park assumed was agreement. A delegate from the Crystal Hegemony stood up on legs that looked like they were made of living diamond. Their voice rang out clear and sharp. These humans think they can fight the Void Reapers with projectiles that travel slower than light. Our plasma rifles can destroy entire buildings in one shot, and they bring us these ancient toys. The laughter grew louder and more cruel. Park could see some of the smaller species delegates wiping tears from eyes that were nothing like human eyes. The insectoid hive representatives clicked their mandibles together in rapid patterns that sounded like applause mixed with the noise of breaking bones. Even the usually quiet stone folk were making deep rumbling sounds that shook the floor. Park let them laugh. He had expected this reaction. Earth had been invited to join the Galactic Defense Council only 3 months ago after first contact with alien visitors. Their technology was thousands of years behind the rest of the galaxy. Their fastest ships could barely reach other star systems, while these aliens traveled between galaxies like humans drove between cities. Their weapons used energy that humans could barely understand, while Earth still relied on chemical explosives and metal bullets. The presentation continued, showing different types of human weapons: sniper rifles with scopes that could see for miles, shotguns designed for close combat, heavy machine guns that could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. Each new image brought fresh waves of laughter from the assembled aliens. They pointed with whatever they used for hands and made comments in languages that the translation devices rendered as increasingly insulting suggestions. One particularly large Altarian delegate stood up and addressed the hall. "Look at their primitive scopes," they said, their crystal face glittering with amusement. "Our targeting systems can lock onto enemies from 3-star systems away and guide plasma bolts through hyperspace. These humans need to actually see their targets and aim manually like children playing with toys." The Void Reapers had been attacking outer rim colonies for 6 months now. Each attack left nothing behind but empty worlds stripped of all life. The enemy ships appeared without warning, struck fast, and disappeared before any defense could be mounted. Every species in the galaxy had contributed their most advanced weapons to the war effort: quantum cannons that could tear holes in space itself, molecular disintegrators that could turn solid matter into its component atoms, energy shields that could absorb the power of entire stars. Then Earth had arrived with guns that fired bullets. Park watched as the hologram showed human soldiers in training, simple men and women learning to shoot and move and fight together. No powered armor, just cloth uniforms and metal helmets. No energy weapons, just rifles and pistols that would have been familiar to soldiers from centuries past. The aliens found this especially amusing, pointing out that their warriors wore suits that could survive being thrown into stars, while humans needed to take cover behind rocks and trees. The mockery continued for almost an hour. Every aspect of human military technology was examined and found laughably inadequate by galactic standards. Human body armor that could stop small projectiles was compared to alien battle suits that could shrug off direct hits from plasma cannons. Human vehicles that moved on wheels across the ground were mocked by species whose warriors could fly through space without any ship at all. When the presentation finally ended, the great hall fell into a temporary quiet that was somehow more insulting than the laughter had been. The silence said that human weapons were so primitive they were not even worth continued mockery. Admiral Korth was the first to speak, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Well, Commander Park," he said, the translation making his words sound almost kind, "we appreciate Earth wanting to help in this conflict." General Vex nodded his crystal head in agreement. "Perhaps your soldiers could help with supply duties or maintenance work on our real weapons, something safe and useful, while the actual fighting is handled by species with proper military technology." The other delegates made sounds of agreement, each offering suggestions for how humans could contribute without actually being allowed near any real combat. Park Jin-woo had served in Earth military for 20 years. He had fought in conflicts across his home planet and had seen what human weapons could do in the right hands. He had trained soldiers who could put bullets through targets smaller than coins at distances measured in kilometers. He knew the stopping power of a well-placed shot and the psychological effect of weapons that killed silently and without warning. But he also knew that words would not convince these aliens. They had technology that seemed like magic to human eyes and confidence born of centuries of military dominance across the galaxy. They saw kinetic weapons as relics from a more primitive time when intelligent species had not yet learned to harness the fundamental forces of the universe. So Park simply nodded and replied in a calm voice that carried clearly through the great hall. "We understand your concerns about our equipment. We would be honored to prove our worth on the battlefield against the Void Reapers. When you see what human soldiers can accomplish, you will understand why we still use these weapons." The laughter started again, but Park was already walking toward the exit. His boots rang against the metal floor as he left behind the mocking voices of a dozen alien species. He had a war to prepare for, and soldiers to equip. The galaxy would learn soon enough that sometimes the oldest weapons were also the most effective. The massive Void Reaper command ship descended through the orange atmosphere of Kepler 442b. Like a falling mountain, its hull was darker than the space between stars and covered with defensive systems that shifted and flowed like living tissue. The vessel was easily 10 kilometers long and half as wide, with weapons platforms that bristled from every surface like the spines of some prehistoric monster staff. Sergeant Park Kyung-min watched the enemy ship through his rifle scope from a rocky outcrop 2 kilometers away from the main battle. The position gave him a clear view of the battlefield where alien forces were concentrating their most powerful weapons against the descending threat. Plasma cannons that could melt continents fired in coordinated volleys, while quantum missiles tore holes in space itself around the enemy vessel. The command ship seemed to absorb the attacks without taking any meaningful damage. Energy shields that glowed with rainbow colors deflected plasma bolts back into space, while adaptive armor plating shifted to counter each new type of weapon fired at it. The vessel continued its steady descent toward the alien command post, apparently immune to everything the galactic forces could throw at it. From the command ship emerged the creature that was leading the Void Reaper assault. It stood over 3 meters tall, even when not fully upright, and its body was a terrifying fusion of organic tissue and mechanical augmentation. The being's torso was covered in biomechanical armor that seemed to flow and adapt with each energy blast that struck it, while its limbs moved with the fluid grace of perfect engineering. Park adjusted his rifle scope and studied the target through the magnified optics. The creature was massive by human standards, but he had taken shots at smaller targets from much greater distances. The weapon in his hands was a masterpiece of human military engineering, built by craftsmen who understood that perfection came through simplicity rather than complexity. The rifle had been manufactured using techniques that had been refined over centuries of warfare. Every component had been tested under the most extreme conditions Earth could simulate. The barrel was machined to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, while the action was designed to function reliably in any environment. The scope was calibrated for the local gravity and atmospheric conditions, and Park had verified the zero personally. That morning around him, the battle raged with an intensity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. Energy weapons that could destroy cities fired in patterns that painted the sky with impossible colors. Explosions that could be seen from orbit bloomed across the landscape as alien forces threw everything they had at the enemy commander. The creature seemed to grow stronger with each failed attack. The Void Reaper leader was advancing steadily toward the main alien command post, while their most powerful weapons struck it again and again without effect. Plasma bolts that could vaporize mountains were absorbed by its adaptive armor. Energy beams that could cut through the hulls of battleships were deflected by shields that seemed to learn from each attack. General Vex of the Altarian Empire was coordinating the assault from his command vehicle several kilometers behind the front lines. His crystalline face reflected the light from energy weapons as he ordered his forces to concentrate their fire on the enemy commander. The Altarian plasma cannons fired in perfect synchronization, sending bolts of superheated gas that could have melted through solid rock. The bolts struck the Void Reaper leader and were absorbed by armor that seemed to drink the energy and convert it into additional defensive capability. The creature paused in its advance and turned toward the Altarian positions. Its face was hidden behind a mask that glowed with malevolent intelligence, but Park could sense its amusement at the futile attacks. Admiral Korth's Zephyrian forces tried a different approach, launching molecular disintegrators that could break down matter at the atomic level. the weapon struck the enemy commander with beams that should have reduced any target to its component elements. Instead, the creature's armor adapted again, becoming even more resistant to energy-based attacks. The Nebula Collective representatives floating in their gas form attempted to coordinate a quantum missile strike that would tear holes in space around the target. The missiles launched with trails of fire that burned holes in the atmosphere, but when they detonated near the Void Reaper leader, the explosions seemed to be absorbed and redirected back into space. Park controlled his breathing and felt the wind across his face. Through his scope, he could see that the creature was still advancing. The distance was extreme, even by sniper standards, nearly 3 kilometers across broken terrain with atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. But these were the kinds of shots that human snipers trained for their entire careers. The alien commanders were beginning to panic as their most advanced weapons proved completely ineffective. Admiral Korth was shouting orders to his tentacled subordinates while General Vex's crystal face flickered with patterns that indicated extreme distress. The creature they were trying to stop seemed unstoppable by any technology in their arsenal. Through his rifle scope, Park studied the target with the methodical precision that had made him one of Earth's most skilled marksmen. The Void Reaper leader was covered in adaptive armor that had proven immune to energy weapons, but kinetic rounds followed different physical laws and obeyed older principles of warfare. The creature's torso was protected by overlapping plates that shifted and flowed with each energy attack, but Park could see joints and connection points where the armor had to remain flexible to allow movement. These weak points were tiny targets that would require perfect accuracy at extreme range, but they existed, and they could be exploited. Park calculated wind speed and direction from the movement of dust and debris across the battlefield. The two suns of Kepler 442b created complex thermal currents that would affect bullet trajectory. While the planet's gravity was slightly different from Earth standard, all of these factors had to be accounted for in his shot placement. The rifle scope was designed for precision shooting at long range, and Park had spent hours calibrating it for local conditions. The crosshairs settled on a joint in the creature's armor just below what appeared to be a primary neural interface. The target area was smaller than a human fist and constantly moving as the creature advanced around him. The battle reached a crescendo of desperation as every species in the Galactic Alliance fired their most powerful weapons at the advancing enemy. The air itself seemed to burn with the energy being released, while explosions that could be felt through the ground shook Park's position, but the Void Reaper leader continued to advance, apparently invulnerable to every weapon that struck it. Park felt his heartbeat slow as he entered the focused state that all professional snipers knew. The chaos of battle faded into background noise while his attention narrowed to encompass only the target, the crosshairs, and the gentle pressure of his finger on the trigger. The shot he was about to take would determine the fate of the entire battle. The distance was impossible by the standards of most species in the galaxy, but human snipers had been making impossible shots for as long as warfare had existed. The weapon in Park's hands represented thousands of years of human military evolution, refined through countless battles and perfected by generations of soldiers who understood that victory often came down to one person making one perfect shot. The crosshairs aligned with the target zone, and Park began his trigger squeeze with the smooth, steady pressure that had been drilled into him through years of training. The rifle recoiled against his shoulder with familiar force, and the bullet left the barrel at a velocity that would carry it accurately across the battlefield in less than 3 seconds' time. Seemed suspended as the projectile crossed the distance between shooter and target, while around them the most advanced weapons in the galaxy continued their futile bombardment of an enemy that seemed truly invincible. The sharp crack of Park Kungmin's rifle cut through the chaos of the battlefield like a blade through silk. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing appeared to change. The massive Void Reaper commander continued its steady advance toward the alien command post, while energy weapons that could destroy planets struck its armor again and again without effect. The creature seemed as invulnerable as ever. General Vex was already turning away from his observation screen, preparing to order a retreat, when the impossible happened. The 3-meter-tall enemy commander stumbled slightly, as if something had disrupted its perfect balance. The alien officers watching from their command posts assumed it was just a momentary glitch in the creature's biomechanical systems, but Park had aimed for the one spot that all the alien weapons had missed, a joint in the adaptive armor that needed to remain flexible for the creature to move. The kinetic round had traveled at supersonic speed across 3 kilometers of battlefield and found its target with the precision that only human marksmanship could achieve. The bullet punched through the joint and struck the Void Reaper's central nervous system, bypassing all of the advanced defensive technologies that had made it immune to energy weapons. The creature's biomechanical armor could adapt to absorb plasma and deflect energy beams, but it could not stop a simple piece of metal traveling at hypersonic velocity. The massive alien warrior took another step forward, then another, before the neural damage reached critical systems throughout its body. The adaptive armor began to flicker and change colors as control systems failed one by one. What had been a terrifying fusion of organic tissue and advanced technology became just another casualty of human military precision. The Void Reaper commander collapsed forward, its 3-meter frame hitting the ground with an impact that could be felt through the rocky terrain. The biomechanical systems that had seemed so invincible moments before began shutting down in cascading failure as the neural network that controlled them went dark. The effect on the Void Reaper forces was immediate and catastrophic. The enemy army had been coordinated through some kind of shared consciousness centered on their fallen commander. Without that central intelligence, their tactical coordination dissolved into chaos. Individual units began acting independently without the perfect synchronization that had made them so dangerous. Admiral Korth watched in amazement as enemy formations that had been advancing with machine-like precision suddenly broke apart into confused clusters of individual fighters. The Zephian commander's tentacles writhed with excitement as he realized that the seemingly unstoppable invasion was falling apart before his eyes. The human soldiers on the battlefield did not waste time celebrating Park's incredible shot. They immediately began engaging the confused Void Reaper forces with the systematic efficiency that had made Earth military doctrine so effective. Master Sergeant Bay and his sniper team began picking off enemy commanders while Kim Min-ho's infantry units moved forward to exploit the chaos. The kinetic weapons that had been dismissed as primitive proved devastatingly effective against enemies whose defensive systems had been designed to counter energy attacks. Void Reaper armor that could absorb plasma bolts crumpled under the impact of high-velocity bullets. Their shields that could deflect molecular disintegrators were useless against simple projectiles. Private Nam Unesio found herself in the surreal position of watching alien soldiers flee from her position as she methodically engaged targets with her standard-issue rifle. The same creatures that had seemed invincible just minutes before were now vulnerable to weapons that any human soldier could use effectively. The tide of battle had turned completely. The retreat became a rout as more Void Reaper units lost coordination and began acting purely on survival instinct rather than tactical doctrine. The enemy forces that had landed on Kepler 442b began streaming back toward their ships while human soldiers continued to engage them at ranges where their superior marksmanship gave them overwhelming advantages. Corporal Lee So-young had moved to a new position where she could cover one of the main retreat routes. Her sniper rifle spoke again and again with the sharp reports that had become the sound of victory. Each shot found its target with the precision that human snipers had perfected through generations of warfare. The alien commanders watching the battle from their command posts were struggling to understand what had just happened. The most technologically advanced enemy they had ever faced had been defeated not by superior weapons or overwhelming firepower, but by the tactical skill and marksmanship of soldiers using weapons that seemed primitive by galactic standards. In the aftermath of the battle, the Great Hall of the Galactic Defense Council was filled with a very different atmosphere than it had been during Park Jin-woo's original presentation. The same alien species that had mocked Earth's rifles with contemptuous laughter now sat in respectful silence as reports of human military effectiveness were read into the official record. General Vex of the Altarian Empire stood before the assembled delegates and formally apologized for his earlier dismissal of human capabilities. His crystal face no longer reflected amusement but genuine respect as he described how human soldiers had accomplished what the most advanced weapons in the galaxy could not achieve. Admiral Korth's tentacles were motionless as he spoke of the devastating effectiveness of kinetic weapons against enemies designed to counter energy-based attacks. The Zephyrian commander admitted that his own tactical doctrine would need to be completely revised to account for what humans had demonstrated on the battlefield. The Nebula Collective's ambassador pulsed with colors that indicated deep admiration rather than the mocking amusement that had characterized their earlier response. The gas being's voice